Hi, my name is Samanja and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to discuss while loop, for loop, while loop, and do while loop, the similarities and the differences between a for loop, while loop, and a do while loop in Java. So, what is a loop? When you think of the word loop, what comes to your mind? What comes to your mind? Like an endless thing, like a shape with a curve and with no exit point. So when you walk in a loop, what does it mean to you? It means that you're coming back to the same place again and again, repeatedly. Now, in programming, it means the same thing. A loop is a structure that tends to repeat itself until a certain condition is reached. So there are three kinds of loop, okay, while loop, for loop, and do while loop. They are used differently depending on what you need. Now, in for loop, the number of iterations to be done is already known. So if there's a problem, for example, you want to print a sentence 10 times, a for loop makes sure that it gets printed 10 times. A for loop is a pre-test loop where all the conditions are tested before the loop starts, and all the pre-existing conditions are given to the for loop so that the sentence can be printed 10 times. And when it reaches the 10th time, it can exit. For example, let's look at this for loop, okay? So I has been initialized to 1 in here. I could initialize it to 0 if I wanted to execute 5 times. And in here, I could put I plus plus, or I equals to I plus 1, which means the same thing, which means I will increase by 1 every time it is looped. So let's run this program, okay? And you can see it's I started at 0. This is I started at 0 and ended at 4. It's 5 times. It has been executed. So this is a for loop. Anything that happens inside this for loop will be executed 5 times. It could be anything. Now, the same result, the same output can also be accomplished by a while loop. And inside a while loop, it's a little different than a for loop. For example, in a while loop, the variable needs to be initialized outside the loop because while loop looks different. Okay, so while loop will execute until a condition is reached. So I can print out the same thing inside a while loop, and I could print out the same thing in a while loop. And this will keep increment every time the loop executes and it comes here, it increments I by 1. So it's I starts at 0 in here, and this sentence gets printed and then it gets incremented by 1, and until it reaches the point, until it becomes, if it becomes I equals to 5, then the entire loop terminates. It's exactly what it sounds. While I is less than 5, this loop will execute. When I is not less than 5, this loop would terminate. Okay, let's run the while loop and let's see what happens. Okay, so the same the same sentence, the same output can be accomplished using a while loop too. Now, in a for loop, we always have to know the pre-existing condition, like how many times the loop needs to be executed. But in a while loop, we do not necessarily need to know how many times a loop needs to be executed. For example, suppose there is a condition where you have no idea how many times the loop needs to be executed, and it needs to be executed until a certain thing happens or a certain condition is reached. For example, suppose you want to ask out a girl in your school, or I don't know, she is she this girl, she has already said no to you, and she's very much out of your league. So it's going to take some work. So while her answer is not equals yes, you will keep asking her out. I do not recommend this to anyone in their personal life. It's not a life advice, but suppose you write a program for her where you keep asking her out until she says yes. Now, you do not know when she will say yes. She can say yes the fifth time you ask her out, or the sixth time, or the 100th time. You do not know. But this loop needs to execute as long as she keeps as it needs to keep executing until she says yes. Would you go out with me? This code needs to keep you need to keep asking her this question until she says yes. So let's and as soon as she says yes. As soon as she says yes, you ask her out for a movie through the program, okay? But the loop needs to terminate in order to come here. Otherwise, it would keep looping through this. Okay, so let's see. Would you go out with me? She says no the first time, no the second time, no the third time, no the fourth time, and the fifth time she takes pity and says yes. You ask her out to a movie. So this can never be accomplished with a for loop because in the for loop, you have to give these conditions to the for loop. You have to know how many times a loop needs to execute. But in a while loop, you do not necessarily have to know how many times the loop needs to execute. It can keep going forever, a millionth time. This would have looped a millionth time unless and until she said yes. So the same, now let's talk about do while loop. What is a do while loop? So we just discussed pre-test loops. A for loop is a pre-test loop. A while loop is a pre-test loop because in these loops we know when the condition testing happens before anything else is executed in here. But in a do while loop, let's write a do while loop for the same program. So in a do while loop, we put the testing first, we put execute. The testing happens after. Would you go out with me? While not answered dot. Okay. So in a do while loop, this is gonna this is going to execute first. This is going to execute later. So this test and this program is going to be run after these two. But the output of a while loop and do while loop will always be the same. It's just the order in which everything else is compiled. So the compiler will compile this first, but but it would after the compiler would read this first and read this later. That doesn't mean it's going to print this first. So like I said, the output for a while loop and a do while loop is the same, but it's the order in which the compiler sees things. So would you go out with me? And she says no, no again, yes the third time, and you can ask, let's watch a movie. But it's the same The output between a while loop and a do while loop is the same. It's the order in which it is tested. The condition is tested by the compiler. In a while loop, the condition is tested before the code starts, before the code starts executing. And in a do while loop, the condition is tested after the compiler reads all this. So that's it. I hope you're clear about while loop and do while loop, and stay tuned.